Why do intelligent, thoughtful people sometimes go along with ideas that later look obviously wrong? History is full of examples. Mass political movements that later look horrifying, financial bubbles that everyone swears were obvious in hindsight, moral panics, social media pylons, wars that were justified with absolute certainty and later revealed to be built on spin, selective facts, or outright lies. Most people are not stupid. They're ordinary people responding to powerful social and emotional signals. So, the real question isn't why are people so dumb, even though sometimes I do wonder that. The real question is, what does all of this do to your nervous system and why do we react the way that we react? What happens when our biology, psychology, and crowd behavior are deliberately targeted, especially during war and propaganda? Welcome to Toxic Physiology. Hi guys, I'm Dr. Mazrui, and today we have a very interesting topic to discuss. What happens when crowds, propaganda, and physiology collide? Now, humans are wired to follow the crowd. It's like a mental shortcut our brains use to quickly decide what's safe, what's good, and what's worth our attention. I mean, picture this, right? You're out and about and you are picking a restaurant. One restaurant has a line stretching around the block. Meanwhile, the one next door is completely empty. Which one do you think you'll pick? Because I'll tell you something, most people will pick the busy one, even if it means waiting and staying hungry a lot longer. Why? Well, because we assume the crowd must know something that we don't. A queue sends a signal to our brain that this restaurant must be high quality. The food must be delicious, because why else would all these people be standing in this queue when there's a perfectly good restaurant that's completely empty next door? Meanwhile, an empty restaurant triggers the opposite thought. We start thinking something must be off with the food or the service, or else others would be there. Psychologists, of course, have a word for this: social proof. So what they say is that instead of analysing every option, we look to other people's behaviour as evidence of the best choice, because it's efficient and it saves mental energy. But it also means we sometimes follow the crowd even when the crowd might not have a clue either. But that shortcut isn't neutral, because in the wrong hands, it can very quickly become a weapon. That shortcut to follow the crowd could be used to steer entire populations, to influence what we buy, what we fear, and even what we believe is true. Now, your brain evolved to survive in groups, not to be a lone, rational thinker. I know, we all love to say that we are introverts. We all love to have our own space. But actually, for most of human history, survival depended on belonging to a tribe. Food, protection, shelter, child raising, these were all group activities, and it is why now you are struggling. So back in the days, being expelled from the group didn't just mean hurt feelings. It actually meant isolation, danger, and even death. So what happened? Well, your nervous system evolved to be hypersensitive to social safety. It constantly tracks questions like, am I accepted? Am I being judged? Am I part of the group? Or am I drifting outside of it? Have you ever noticed that when you're in a group, you're always thinking, what's my social standing? Do I belong in this group? Am I still part of this group? Modern neuroscience shows that intense social rejection can activate some of the same brain circuits involved in physical pain. In simple terms, your body can experience exclusion as a genuine threat. This means that your nervous system is always scanning for signals like who agrees with me, who disapproves, where the group consensus seems to be, what people like us are supposed to think. When that system senses social danger, your body reacts, your heart rate shifts, your gut tightens, your brain becomes more cautious and more focused on not standing out. Your brain would often rather be wrong with the group than right and alone. Now, would you deny what you see with your own eyes just because everyone else disagrees? Let me tell you about this experiment that was done on Conformity, where people were asked to do a simple visual task. They were told to look at a line on one card, then pick which of the 3 lines on another card matches it. The answer was obvious, almost impossible to get wrong. But there was a setup that they were not aware of. The real participant was placed in a group. Everyone else in the room was secretly in on the experiment, and they all deliberately gave the same wrong answer out loud, again and again. The results were uncomfortable. Roughly 1/3 of participants agreed with the clearly wrong answer at least once. Why? Well, because the pressure of the group created psychological and physical discomfort. Many described feeling tense, anxious, unsure of themselves, indicating that resisting the group wasn't just an intellectual act, it just felt physically uncomfortable. So people sometimes choose their group over their own senses. They will deny what they see with their own eyes rather than stand alone. Now, imagine that same mechanism, not in a lab, but in a society under stress, in a war, in a climate of fear, with 24-hour propaganda. How likely do you think people will be willing to stand up against the crowd? Now, humans experience powerful social emotions. Things like shame, embarrassment, humiliation. These emotions evolve to regulate behavior inside groups. They're not random. They're the body's way of saying, careful, you're about to lose your place in society. So when you feel watched or judged, your nervous system ramps up. Your heart beats faster. You become hyper aware of how you look and sound. You feel way more cautious and more risk averse. That's why speaking up in a meeting can feel like a minor panic attack. It's why challenging the dominant view in your social circle can feel dangerous, even when no one is literally threatening you. Your body can treat disagreeing with the group like a physical threat. And on a larger scale, this is why teams stay quiet about bad decisions. It's why people laugh at jokes they don't find funny. It's why, for example, in times of war, people will whisper doubts privately, but publicly, they will repeat the same slogans. In those moments, the body is choosing social safety over inner honesty. The nervous system often interprets disagreement as danger. Another thing, people don't just follow crowds because they're scared. Okay, that's a big factor of it, but it's not the only reason. Sometimes people follow crowds because they genuinely think the crowd must be right. Now, psychologists talk about 2 main types of social influence. The first is informational influence. This is when we assume that the group probably knows something that we don't. If everyone around you behaves as if something is true, your brain starts treating that behavior as a kind of evidence. I'll give you an example of this. I remember after you finish an exam, and everyone's like, oh, what did you get for question 7? And everybody else is saying, oh, I got 54. And you're like, I did not get 54, I got 26. And you're waiting around for someone else to say 26. Nobody says 26. You are the only person who has 26, even though you were confident that it was 26 when you did the exam. You then start saying to yourself, maybe it wasn't 26. Maybe there's something wrong with the way that I did this calculation. Therefore, I must be wrong because everybody else must have gotten the number right. So then you just sit there silently and sadly and go home depressed, thinking that you must have failed the entire exam because you got that answer wrong. Now, the second is normative influence. What is normative influence? This is about belonging. Even if you privately disagree, you may publicly conform to avoid rejection, conflict, or humiliation. Now, let's take this incident of war. In war, both forces are amplified. And what's the example of normative influence? Well, have a look at your social media. You see what your friends are posting, what your community leaders are saying, what your colleagues repeat. You don't want to be the one person who sounds like a traitor or an extremist. So you stay quiet or you just nod along, even though you think what they're saying is wrong, but you don't want to stand out. You don't want to be the odd one out. So sometimes people follow the crowd because they believe the crowd is correct. Sometimes they follow the crowd because they're afraid of being alone. Now, emotions spread through crowds faster than facts. Humans are wired for emotional mirroring. We unconsciously copy the facial expressions, the tone, and the energy of people around us. You might even notice this when you're talking to other people. You will fold your hands if they're folding their hands. Some people have done this. I'm not going to say who. When somebody has an accent, you might find yourself copying that accent too. And you're like, wait, why do I suddenly have this accent? Where the hell did it come from? But you're doing it unconsciously. You can't help it, right? I know when I'm speaking to family members who speak the same language as me, I sometimes mirror that accent that they're speaking, you know? So we unconsciously copy the facial expressions, the tone and the energy of people around us. Like I remember postpartum, I would talk like a baby because I was just around a baby 24/7. I started copying my baby. My facial expressions matched the baby, you know? And I had to literally be like, snap out of it, snap. And learn how to speak to adults again because I'd spent so long just talking to this baby. Anyway, let's move on. So we unconsciously copy the facial expressions, the tone and the energy of people around us. And over time, this emotional contagion pulls our nervous system into sync. So if everyone around you is afraid, anxiety spreads. If everyone around you is outraged, anger spreads. If everyone around you is hyped and triumphant, excitement spreads. And you can see this, right? In any large crowd, you go to a football match, when you're winning, everyone is happy. When you're losing, everyone is angry. I know I'm like this. When I watch the World Cup, even though I don't really watch football, but when I'm watching the World Cup, it does take me away. I forget myself. I forget myself completely. And next thing you know, I'm swearing at the ref like everybody else. Astaghfirullah. Anyway, in a large crowd, this can escalate very quickly. Fear can quickly become panic. Anger can very quickly become fury. Suspicion can go on and become hatred. Biologically, shared emotional intensity can increase bonding hormones such as oxytocin and strengthen group identity and make group identity feel even stronger. So you don't just think with the group, you feel with the group. And the higher the emotional intensity, the harder it is to slow down and analyze. We move from is this true to this feels true. For example, anyone who had to endure foundation year 1 training as a doctor, we really bonded. We were suffering together. And as a result of that, we built a special relationship. You know, in the topic of war, soldiers tend to have a special bond with one another because they went through something so emotionally charged, so intense. So you don't just think with the group, you start feeling with the group. And the higher the emotional intensity, the harder it is to slow down and analyze. Crowds don't just share ideas, they actually share emotional states. Now, your nervous system was built for a village, but currently in the modern world, it's plugged into the entire internet. And social media turns crowd psychology into a constant global feedback loop. So instead of seeing what a few hundred people in your town think, you start to see what millions of people think. Every time you open an app, you see the likes, shares, the comments, you know, outrage storms, the hashtags, and your brain reads these as social signals. If thousands of people seem to support an idea, your nervous system is more likely to treat it as normal, safe, or probably correct. If thousands seem to attack it, your body feels that as a threat, even if the issue doesn't touch your actual daily life. I remember there was a time on X when my feed was full of Islamophobic posts and I was just like, wow, is this how everyone feels? And that was not true at all, because when I go about my day-to-day life, most people were lovely. Very few people expressed these views, but I still felt a level of threat because online, that's all I kept seeing. But what I want you to know is these platforms don't necessarily reflect reality. They amplify it, they distort it, and coordinated campaigns can make a narrative feel everywhere when in fact it's been artificially amplified. And you know what was interesting about this particular bout of Islamophobic comments on my FYP, it was then later on found to have been artificially amplified. So what ends up happening is that people start responding not to reality, but to the perception of a crowd, even if that crowd is artificial. And the tragic thing is that your nervous system can't tell the difference. Now, when a group becomes too unified, it can actually become less intelligent. What? Yes. This is called groupthink. Groupthink is what happens when maintaining harmony becomes more important than being accurate. So in a highly cohesive group, especially under pressure, dissent becomes uncomfortable. Questioning the dominant story feels disloyal. People start censoring themselves before they even speak. On the outside, the group looks confident and united, but on the inside, curiosity dies. Assumptions go unchallenged, warning signals are ignored. Now, let's look at the example of what's happening today in Iran and with the US. A lot of commentators and pundits have been warning that the Senate and the people around President Trump all share the same opinions and that there is not any room for any dissent.
Are you completely on board with the current war in Iran?
So I like for odds are. It's certainly what we're going to do. And look, we have to do it. As the president said, this is a problem that has festered in this country for far too long, and far too few people have actually wanted to do anything about it. That's what makes this administration different, is that we actually tackle the problems the American people have been confronting. So I'm very happy about it. And look, I think that I know what you're trying to do, Phil. You're trying to drive a wedge between members of the administration, between me and the president. What the president said consistently, going back to 2015, and I agreed with him, is that Iran should not have a nuclear weapon. We have taken this military action under the president's leadership. I think all of us, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, should pray for his success and pray for the safety of our troops. That's the approach that I've taken. Make it as successful as possible.
So there's no hesitation, given your past statements, with the current operation?
What do you mean there's no hesitation with my past statements?
Given your skepticism of foreign adventurism, you were a critic of the global war on terror previously.
Well, I think one big difference, Phil, is that we have a smart president, whereas in the past we've had dumb presidents. And I trust President Trump to get the job done, to do a good job for the American people, and to make sure that the mistakes of the past aren't repeated. Absolutely.
Anyone who speaks out against the war has been vilified. In times of war, this is especially dangerous because questioning a strategy or evidence can be framed as supporting the enemy. So people stop questioning. And what ends up happening? Well, mistakes grow larger. There's no room for critical thinking. For you to form a successful strategy of war, you need to be able to have dissent and you need to be able to have open communication where you allow others to question your ideas. Because if you don't do that, you can't think outside the box and therefore your view is narrow. And as a result of that, there's a higher likelihood of making mistakes. So while the group becomes more certain, confidence inside a group does not necessarily mean the group is correct. And in a situation like war, that could be the difference between life and death. Now, every war is fought with weapons, but it is sold with stories.
Short-term disruption for the long-term gain. Short-term pain be for long-term gain.
Short-term pain for the long-term gain.
Propaganda takes everything we've just talked about, social proof, emotional contagion, groupthink, and uses it deliberately. It simplifies complex political situations into simplified moral narratives, as we discussed in this previous episode where we talked about how propaganda is used. So, the simplified moral narratives are things like we are rational, reasonable, reluctant heroes. They are the irrational, fanatical evil. You hear language like this is a holy war. This is a crusade. This is a war for civilization. We are God's chosen people. This is a battle for the soul of the world. This is good versus evil.
I hear a sound of an abundance of rain. I hear a sound of victory. The Lord says it is done. The Lord says it is done. The Lord says it is done. For I hear victory, 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 victory in the corridors of heaven. In the corridors of heaven, angels are being dispatched right now. Hamanda aka ata raka teda baka sanda ata ambo osa kata rite eke banda ata rite.
This kind of framing is intentional and it does several things at once. What it does is it fuses politics with morality and sometimes with religion. It makes compromise feel like betrayal and it makes questioning feel dangerous, almost sinful. At the same time, fear-based images and stories flood the environment. Worst case scenarios, dramatic clips, selective footage, highly emotional commentary, false flags and misinformation, whether real operations or conspiracy-style rumors, add another layer of confusion.
And we may have casualties. That often happens in war.
I don't know if this is technically a war.
We didn't start this war.
But under President Trump, we are finishing it.
This isn't a war. We haven't declared war.
The Secretary of Defense, who calls himself the Secretary of War, said today this is a war.
We set the terms of this war, from start to finish.
Nobody should classify this as war. It is combat operations.
War is hell.
Now, confusion is a tool of war, because if people are now not only afraid, they're also unsure of what's real. They often cling even harder to their own side's narrative because it feels stable. And all of this doesn't just shape what people think, it shapes how their bodies feel all day long. War in the environment will eventually become war in their body. You don't have to be on a battlefield for war to change your biology. Your nervous system reacts to perceived threat, not just physical danger. When you're seeing endless headlines, shocking images, apocalyptic language, when you're hearing talk of escalation, holy war, end of times, and enemies at the gates, your body hears one message: I am not safe. The stress response kicks in, heart rate and blood pressure increases, breathing becomes shallow, muscles tense, digestion slows, and blood flow shifts away from the gut. Your sleep gets lighter and more fragile. In the short term, this is adaptive, it prepares you to deal with a real crisis, but when it becomes chronic, when you wake, work, scroll, and sleep in that state, it becomes toxic physiology. It then goes on to contribute to anxiety, depression, irritability, gut issues, headaches, and it lowers your immunity. It makes you more reactive in your relationships and less reflexive in your thinking. At a population level, this shows up as increased stress-related illness, addiction, aggression, and burnout. War and propaganda are not just political problems, they are public health problems. The more uncertain a situation becomes, the more powerful crowds become. In crisis, people look for shortcuts. They look for someone to follow, they look for signs of what everyone else believes in. Crowds become a proxy for reality. If everyone is afraid, maybe I should be afraid. If everyone is calling for escalation, maybe that's the only option. At the leadership level, another dynamic appears. If you wanted to look at it from who benefits perspective, leaders often escalate language to signal strength and deterrence.
The president's not afraid to take action with hard power when necessary.
The Iranian government found out what the Trump doctrine is all about, and that is mess around and find out.
Donald Trump has the guts, the balls, and the vision to do things that nobody else will do.
I'm going to leave the balls thing alone for now.
Each side wants to look tougher and more committed than the other, so threats get louder, rhetoric gets more extreme. But while leaders are playing signaling games, ordinary nervous system of the ordinary person is absorbing every word. All your body hears is danger, danger, danger. In uncertainty, the crowd becomes the guide for the nervous system. And if that crowd is being manipulated, your physiology is being manipulated with it. You don't escape crowd influence by pretending you're immune to it. Every human brain is shaped by social signals. No one is outside of this. If you have a nervous system, you're part of the story, whether you like it or not. So the goal is not to become cold or disconnected. The goal is to notice when your body is conforming out of fear rather than conviction. One simple question can help. If nobody was watching me, would I still believe this? And would I still say this out loud? That question creates a pause, a tiny gap between social pressure and personal judgment. It separates the need to belong from the need to be honest with yourself. You may still end up agreeing with the crowd, you may still stand with your community, but you'll be doing it with awareness, not just automatic physiology. That small pause is where independent thinking begins. The human brain evolved for belonging, not independence. Crowds shape what we believe, how we feel, and how we interpret the world. Propaganda and war narratives know this very well, and they target the social nervous systems directly and on purpose. Understanding these pressures doesn't mean rejecting community. It means recognizing when your nervous system is following the crowd instead of your conscience. When your stress response is being kept on a permanent on switch for someone else's agenda, the goal isn't to never follow a group. The goal is to know when your body is doing it for you, because you can't control every narrative, every headline, every crowd, but you can learn to notice when the crowd is thinking and feeling for you. The moment you notice that pressure in your body is the moment you begin to take back control of your mind. Now, if this resonated with you or if you completely disagree, I want to hear it. Leave a comment and tell me where you stand and why. If you find Toxic Physiology useful, like this video, share it with someone who needs to see it, and follow the page so you don't miss the next episode. This is Toxic Physiology. where we explain the science behind the chaos. I'll see you for the next episode.